Hello and welcome to another episode of the Company Road podcast, where we navigate the fascinating world of intrapreneurship and innovation. And today I'm really excited to introduce a highly distinguished guest whose expertise in design and innovation and growth strategies has really left an incredible mark on both academic and corporate landscapes. Dr. Munib Karavdic, thank you very much for joining us on the show, Dr. Munib.
It is a pleasure to be with you, Chris.
Thank you. Munib, you're an esteemed entrepreneur and award-winning innovation executive. I'm just going to introduce you a little bit. So you're also CEO of Wave Design. And Wave Design, for those that don't know, is a pillar of the design and innovation industry here in Australia. And Munib is a senior executive and conjoint professor at University of New South Wales. And you've led award-winning teams and crafted customer-centric strategies. And you've driven growth across many, many organizations. So you've got commercial acumen and human-centered design, and you're really all about transforming ideas into impactful solutions. And you've also got a PhD in e-commerce and a wealth of experience in corporate leadership and academia. So I'm really excited to get into the conversation today, Dr. Munib. And I think maybe we start with a conversation around your journey as an entrepreneur and some of the significant moments that may spring to mind, things that shaped your career. So what led you to corporate life and how did you end up doing what you do?
Well, the first significant moment in my life, it was when I came to Australia with my family. And I came here to do my PhD. And I did a PhD in e-commerce. So to be honest, when I started, it was very much about supply chain management. We are talking about 95, 96, when only a few Australian companies had a website. And then I had a very, very nice PhD supervisor who told me, hey, you know what, it's supply chain, a lot of people write about that, did the research about supply chains management. Might be a better idea to focus on new technology. There is something called internet. And why don't you actually start building this academic paradigm? There is still not theory about e-commerce. We call it paradigm. And then he intrigued me with that, and I started digging in deeper. But then always with new things, you're facing challenges. And a lot of people didn't understand the internet or e-commerce and saying, well, I remember I was told, why are you doing this? Because we are in academia, we do serious research. Internet is very much where people are reading news, playing games, and watch porno. And my response was, they're making money. They start making money on that, which means that there is an indication that money will be there. So it was actually very difficult for a period of time, because then suddenly e-commerce becomes buzzword. Like today, when everybody's talking about AI, it just reminded me today, while we were 25 years ago, when we were completely talking about e-commerce, e-cash, e-card, e-this, e-that. It was unbelievable. And until 2000, when actually this dot-com bubble burst. And that was the critical moment that helped me to actually go and focus on collect the data and then test my hypotheses, which are based very much on Schumpeter's creative destruction, which is the innovation theory established back in 40s. But what is actually then a turning moment for me during the PhD, it wasn't actually that I completed PhD, but what I learned from it. And one of the many learnings that I had was, if companies or if we want to move our life from a physical world into digital or a virtual world, we need to reimagine product, service, and experience and processes. So it is impossible to get it right if we try to literally move physical experience. Like what we have here today is mimicking physical experience, not just in studio. But I don't think it's a great experience for audience. Same with many other things when you go shopping and whatever you do on the internet. And even worse, a lot of companies are now thinking, oh, I will turn off my phone number in my call center and I will put some internet engine that drive this, and people become frustrated. And that's why you can see and you can read a lot of unsatisfied customers because of the fact that companies try to save money and turning internet as a service tool, but which is not right. And I'm talking about back in 2019, so it's 99 or 2000, and we talked 24 years ago. And that was the moment that I realized that I don't want to go into e-commerce and technical aspect of e-commerce. I believe that reinventing experience, product and services requires innovation. And that was the moment. And then instead of actually being full-time in academia, I continue my work in corporate world. And then I was trying to promote innovation as part of the growth options for corporations, especially established. I started working at Macquarie Bank, then St. George Bank, and then end up an AMP, Executive Director for Growth Innovation. But during that journey, I was always pushing new things to actually develop and focus on innovation. And you can imagine, you always have a pushback. And the company that I didn't have a lot of pushback was Macquarie, and no wonder. I was in Macquarie, I finished 2001 for 4 or 5 years, and we had 900 employees. Today, they have more than 20,000. And that's what's telling you magnitude of the open-mindedness and the kind of supporting ideas and creativity in the organization. So that was a big moment. And then another big moment was with St. George, when the learning was that we had some growth initiatives which were quite innovative at the time, building some franchise model for lending in the states that St. George didn't have a strong presence, like Victoria, Queensland, and WA. And then we learned that when you're actually doing a business case and you finish that and you got the money and you hand over to team to implement. And then, because I was head of growth strategy at the time, I was actually ordered the guys to do his post-implementation review. And what we found, that people who were implementing didn't follow exactly the requirements, essential requirements for that particular project. And then I decided that next project I'm going to do end-to-end on my own, and I've navigated through blank sheet of paper with the product, and it was quite an innovative product, and right through the launch, where we launched that to the Australian market and very much New South Wales market. And then Westpac acquired St. George and the established Bank of Melbourne. And that product was key feature to demonstrate how Bank of Melbourne is innovative by kind of launching that product in Melbourne at the time. So that was learning that how important it is actually not to hand over, that to transition when you have an idea, a concept very well developed. You don't hand over that, you transition that and navigate through just having different mix of capabilities and skills that people need. Obviously, when you come to the IT implementation, you need people from IT, but you never actually lose that aspect of design and understanding end users and then taking insights with you as long as you go through the process, including these insights into IT and technology, because very often technology is just doing kind of programming, hardwiring, coding, and things like that. But it is important to have in mind, even when they do that, to have in mind that they are doing that based on insights that they hear from people. And the third one is with the AMP, when I had an unbelievable support from leadership to actually establish design and innovation function. And then we actually started really focusing entire organization on human-centered design and then have a customer-centric focus, to the point that we designed new system and platform for financial planning called goals-based advice, which is basically designed for people goals, and then advisors would use digital means to actually engage with clients and customers, and then to the point that customers will have a very clear picture what they need to talk to with financial advisors before they even join them, and before they start the first meeting. And then what actually helped us to significantly increase acquisition from the first meeting. Acquisition rate was very poor, but because of these kind of not known expectations from both sides. So what we discovered that through our insights and find out that it is important that we prepare both parts of customers as well as financial advisors before they meet. And when they meet, they have a friendly conversation. And it's kind of massively increased acquisition rate for them. And then also, we did a lot of insurance products, claims. We designed a new claim system. We designed new transactional banking product, which is also quite a good feature at the time. And then we got for all of these initiatives that had a Good Design Award. And we were the first financial services organization to got a Good Design Award in Australia. It was probably 2014 or 15, I can't remember that. And then the pinnacle of that was actually the team that we built, and then in the processes and frameworks, to the point that we had a senior design lead sitting into investment committee and then making decisions with other kind of functions to make sure that it is customer-centric, that they have a design kind of all these aesthetics and everything what is necessary for product or whatever we approve money for. That was very important. And then all our designers were almost all capital expenditure projects involved designers in that work. And it was always starting from problem framing, understanding the problem, and then working through end users and understanding users and going testing that with end users and figuring out, is this the right thing? And we had a lot of prototypes which didn't work, but that's the whole point. We didn't spend a lot of money on prototypes before we actually have a full-blown system launch. And especially, for example, with these goals-based advice, it requires a lot of technology there. And we launched that, I think, on 30 practices across Australia to see how it's going to work, and we learn from there. And then fourth milestone is then when I realized that when we did it at AMP, I established these innovation labs once without leadership knowing that, and then I introduced them to them. They all loved that, and they gave me money to build another one, an innovation lab in the building. And then suddenly we got a lot of interest from other companies like AMP, like top ASX listed companies, Telstra, Qantas, Optus. Well, many companies came to our lab and to learn what we achieved there. And we got a Design Management Institute award for best practice in establishing design and innovation team in an organization. And it was really, at that moment, was an eye-opener for me, and thinking probably it's now time that I spread my wings and then help other organizations in Australia to build design innovation programs. And because we're talking about growth, because innovation is creating growth. Design is helping create innovation. So it's all kind of line up with each other. And then I thought that's the way. And then that's the reason I resigned at AMP, left a very comfortable position, and then decided to go into challenging role building wave design. And 8 years down the track, I still believe in that. And our key proposition here is to make an impact with the organizations together. And which means we're not just coming in and help companies to either solve the problem or build innovation or define the growth options. We actually get their subject matter experts together with us. And then once we finish our work, we train them to the level that they can handle that. And remember what I told you, what I learned at St. George, transitioning. We upskill people to the point when we leave with all of these tested concepts or prototypes, they can continue with their IT or implementation team that without any challenges while they are doing that. So making sure that what is actually projected from customer insights and then what at desirability level is going through feasibility and viability as well. So we have a couple of companies we did it, which means it's working. And it requires leaders to recognize that and then believe in that. And then the crucial thing in all of this is it is significantly less risky doing in that way rather than saying, here is my business case, put $10 million and then have a leap of faith that will be executed as it's actually written in business case. And I can tell you, I've been writing business cases, monitoring, and then having post-implementation review, many of them, and I can tell you probably only 40% of those business cases were executed in the way how it was actually put in the paper. And the main reason for that is that they all work on unvalidated assumptions. And that's what creates challenge. With this approach, you validate assumptions and you go through the process. And then there are a lot of theory would say, if you make a mistake in a very early stage of idea development, for every dollar invest, you lose $1. And I can tell you, building small paper prototype, as you know that, would cost $50,000, not more, not even that. So paper prototype would cost you $1,000, but including people work and things like that. But if you go and start working and then fail closer to launch, it will, for every dollar you invest, you're losing 10. But if you actually finish that, hardwired, but put in the system and code it and everything, and you launch it, for every dollar you invest, you're losing $100. And then that's the kind of problem. And then we work on that one from day one with this leap of faith. Whatever we put in the business case, we believe that we'll deliver that. But when we start launching that, that creates problem for the organization. And I remember I was listening radio, and one GM from one of the companies saying, they're asking him, what happened to your product? Why it's not going well in the market? And his response was, well, I don't know. We actually ran the survey, and then we got a response that 80% of people said that they will highly likely buy the product. And that's the catch. but well, let's launch it and expect that will happen. But what people say and what people do are two different things. And that's why it's important to go through these journeys slowly and then prototype this and test these prototypes to make sure the people, what they're actually saying, they're actually doing, not just saying that. Yeah. It is probably a long introduction of these, my 4 phases of life here in Australia, but there are significant milestones for me.
Yeah, good answer. Very comprehensive. And I like the way in which you tell the story from your beginnings and all the way through. And there's a wealth of experience in there that I'd like to go into. But it feels like maybe a unifying theme across all of that is maybe to do with you more at a personal level. And I'd love to get your point of view on you as a person and what drives you forward through some of the experiences that you've come across in your career, because it's not something that everyone could endure. And I wonder on a personal level, what's driving you?
Well, it's a very good question. And actually, I was asked by AGSM 4 or 5 years ago, because of my experience navigating innovation through complex organizations, I was asked to actually create a product called Intrapreneurship. And then intrapreneurship is quite interesting. Not many people talking about it. So a lot of people talk about entrepreneurship, and then it's very cool. Suddenly you have a startup, you have a T-shirt with the name of your startup, you have a hat, and you look cool, and because you're going to pitching and things like that, which is all great. And I don't want to minimize that. But the point here is we don't give the justice for people who are really fighting very hard in very complex organizations. One thing you have here in startup, then you have a 3 or 4 or 5 people, and it's very easy to make this call. But the problem here is when you have a 5 or 10,000 people or 100,000 people. Procter & Gamble would have a 400,000 people globally. And that's the catch, how you navigate that. Then what these companies have, which is a market reach, very technology, expertise, money, a lot of things. And what they have a problem is that culture, that we try to actually pigeonhole people on for their function they got a job description for. And we're saying, look, you are an accountant and all you do is just accounting. And then we're not actually helping people to think broadly or actually start releasing their creativities. Because to some extent, we are all born equally creative. And then our lives push us out of creativity. For example, somebody born in Australia would have a much better prospect for creativity than somebody who was born in developing countries. For example, poor nations, like they don't have enough money, like Afghanistan or in Africa, because its surrounding is not actually there. But it doesn't limit that. In some way, they're creating some challenges with it. And that's the kind of key point now in new modern world with innovation, how we actually bring people back with creativity. Because people are creative to find a partner. They are creative to establish family. They are creative buying houses. They have hobbies. Outside the work, they are very creative people. As soon as they walk into the organization, we say, no, you are doing this. And that's it. And we think that is most efficient. It's not about efficiency, it's about effectiveness. And then it's a significant difference between these two terms. Efficiency is doing faster no matter what. But effectiveness, are you making impact? Are you creating some effect? And then we measure this value is through do it faster. And I remember when I started here, constantly, oh, it's too slow, too slow. But you know, when you are going fast, then you are making a lot of mistakes. And a very long way to answer your questions. I was very inspired with the fact that it is important to navigate your idea or different thinking through the organization. And then, as you can imagine, you don't go to CEO and say, hey, I'm okay for innovation. I will drive this for you. You don't go there. You're actually trying to find them some friends and champions who will actually follow you if you want to do that. And then I was surprised when I started talking to people, how many people actually turn up and say, hey, I'm here to help, call me, and la. And we actually, somehow, I was lucky that I managed to get some funding to test some innovation. And fortunately, we really deliver innovation, and that was actually proven that's working. And I established this subject to actually help people, MBA students, to navigate innovation through organization. And when I talk to them, my first advice for them, which is not applicable for everybody, but it was me, how I look at that to the point that I was confident that it is important to focus on innovation and change and design, to the point that I will challenge every day leadership and people in the organization to the point that they fire me. And fortunately or unfortunately, they didn't fire me. And probably if they fired me, I could get some redundancy and things like that. But they didn't. And then sometimes you go there and there are some ways how you challenge that. But you also have people who are behind you, champions, who are with the same mindset and same desire to change or create something new. And you can see those people, they work in company for salary. They don't own any shares in the company, but they feel excited because they're thinking, I make my life in office much more interesting rather than just focusing on what I was asked and pigeonholed for.
Yeah, okay. It sounds like you've obviously taken it from your experience and you've now shared that with a number of people through your academic work, and obviously you've helped a number of organizations through that. Was there something at the core of your own experience that meant that you felt either confident or brave enough to take that forward in the corporate world when you first came into it?
I think it was a long time ago when I graduated, accidentally introduced some policy I was actually graduate. And then there was some changing the policy and how people are awarded. And it was very accidentally. I put like something around innovation saying we should probably reward people who are bringing new things and either generating revenue or saving the cost for the company. And then I was going around it was some mechanical engineering company, and I was talking to some people, and the guy was saying to me, we were having coffee, he said, this is really crazy. We're spending this much money on this small spare part, but I can make it manual and then we will save a lot of money. And I said, look, did you know that we have in our policy, if you save money, you will get this percentage of saved money as a bonus. And he said, I didn't know that. And the guy started actually doing that. And then suddenly he did it and then tested. And we've started actually installing this mechanical device instead of electronic device. And then it was announced that he got a nice bonus because he saved company probably a couple of $1 million. He didn't get $2 million, but he got a nice bonus. And everybody was shocked when they heard that. And they said, oh, we didn't know this exists. From that moment, everybody started doing stuff. And not everybody, but people start actually experimenting, trying to figure out some things. People stay after work to do some stuff because in mechanical engineering, you can stay there and you can test it and you can quickly find if it's working or not. That was the moment that I realized that if you actually have some right policy and then try to actually create some mindset, that people would like to put their creativity on the table. And one thing is money, but the other thing is, even more important, is recognition. And then the guy, for example, that guy was talking, he became very popular in the organization, and everybody was asking him, hey, what do you think about this? What do you about that? To the point that he said, well, I can't do my work properly because people are annoying me with their questions and asking to support them to do stuff like that. That was one of the moments. And the second moment was the PhD results when I mentioned to you, when I realized that we need to focus on innovation in order to actually transition from physical world into virtual world. Whatever we want to do, we can't transition everything. And then, as we say, we can't actually perform all jobs remotely. You have to go physically in office or factory or whatever. Same with the physical versus digital world. There are the two moments, well-defining moments in my career where I realized how important it is to focus on innovation. And that will give you growth. That's the whole point. Sooner you start doing that, the better chance you have for growth.
A lot of people ask where to start, in a sense. And I'm hearing from your story that, and I can relate to this totally as well, it feels like almost a constraint. So in the story that you described, where there was a bonus involved if somebody could save the company money, and that was written down in a policy somewhere, and that was made known to you, and then obviously that became a thing. And I wonder whether constraint, because it's so present in a lot of large organizations and corporate government, wherever you work, but it feels like constraint can obviously be a starting point for what to push against and what to work within. What's been your observation around working with restrictions in that sense?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, and I was actually just finished writing a paper for a service design network, Touchpoint. They have a published paper, how to establish service design function in complex organizations. And one of the first point I was making is saying you need to demonstrate the value of that. And then demonstrating value, you don't need to have an entire board support recognition. You don't need to have a leadership recognition. You just need to have one enthusiastic leader with small budget willing to make the difference. The catch is to find that person. And once you find that person, usually you don't spend a lot of money to create movement. And then you just, with small amount, you demonstrate that it can create value, and then you start working on it. So one example from one of the companies that I work for, we found that we are sending 50 cents or $2 check to customers while processing that check costs $20. And then, you know what, we talk about millions of customers sending these checks. And then it's very well known fact that 30% of addresses of banking or financial services customers are wrong because people are moving and they don't update addresses or they change things and things. And then you get these mail back. And then you need to send again. And we talk about 5 cents, $2, $10, below $10, and nonsense. So we found a solution for that. And we first realized that this is a really problem. And then we had a campaign called Dumb Things We Ask You to Do. And then people say, this is really dumb. And people saying, and we changed that. And guess what? We kind of immediately saved $600,000 a year. Just not doing that. And then when we went and asked finance guys to actually put these numbers together in projections, and they put on, and they went to leadership and say, well, it's really actually 600,000 that we contribute to the bottom line. And then people say, oh, really interesting. Well, what can we do more of these things? And then suddenly things started moving. It's this very small thing, which didn't cost us much money to implement at all. Just change the policy, then just inform when one of these checks that you are sending, inform them that you will not send check again. So you will have some other options for them.
Yeah, I think this is where innovation obviously gets a bad rap sometimes because it's considered to be superfluous. It's over and above the needs of the core business. And it's usually associated with something that's net new to what that business is delivering as a new venture or a new pursuit in some way. But what you're also saying is that incremental innovation or even something that's a bit reductionist in how it's focused because it's taking something, simplifying it, make it more effective, not efficient.
Yeah,
but efficient as well, probably. And yeah, it's just about focusing in on the right things and fixing them. And it's more about solutioning in that space.
Spot on, Chris. And several times I've been invited to CEO Institute to actually have a innovation workshop with CEOs, non-competing CEOs. They have their cohorts, and every month they met together and they discussed different topics and themes. And one of them was innovation. And I had one slide which I was trying to explain to them that a lot of people, I found working with Wave and talking to leaders, a lot of leaders are saying, we have a problem, we don't know how to define innovation. And this is a serious problem because when you sit in a leadership group, everybody has their own definition of innovation. And it's not helpful. And then what I was saying that innovation, a lot of people mistakenly believe that innovation must be jaw-dropping, like something, wow, so significant.
Yeah.
And I have a picture moving from analog phone to a smartphone, which is really, yes, revolutionary, absolutely. But I have another picture in the cosmetics retail shop where you have shopping cards with white and black color. Yeah. And the white color was saying, take this shopping cart if you need assistance. Black color was saying, take this one if you don't need assistance. Yeah. So, and then when you look at that saying, well, so what? But you know, how often you actually annoyed in the shop, you want to do something on your own, you're browsing around and somebody's coming and saying, can I help you? Because people don't know if you need help or not. When you take one of those colors, people have a very clear picture if you need help or not. And that's innovation too. That small thing didn't cost. You're just ordering shopping carts, 2 different colors. It costs you marginal funding just to have different colors, and that's it. But you're helping people and your staff internally enormously and creating pleasant experience. And that's service innovation.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be this big million dollar arm of the company and there's a head of innovation and they only get sort of VIP projects. It can actually be very day-to-day. We've been talking about innovation. We've also talked a bit about intrapreneurship. I'm curious as to what you teach, but also what your view is around where we've got a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to the shows about that. What are we saying people should be focusing on in their roles to get some of the impact that you've been describing, do you think?
Yeah, it's very interesting you mentioned this entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. And it's interesting tension. And then, well, I've been witnessing this hype about entrepreneurship and startup. And when I worked in large organizations, they're saying, well, we need to actually invest in startups. And I said, why do you need to invest in startups? And the answer was, we need to learn how they come with the newer things, how they navigate things, how they build in product, service, systems, and things like that. And I said, hang on a minute, you're telling me that you are going to learn from 5 people, organizations had 10,000 employees, massive leadership, and you're going to learn how 5 people navigate that without anything, and you have everything. And then these two worlds are not comparable. And that was one of the key challenges that I had personally. The other thing, what I realized, that a lot of companies are trying to avoid the inevitable repositioning, then they need to transform themselves to be more nimble, more agile, more innovative, more entrepreneur-based and things like that, then more creative. When you have this creativity expressed in the organization, and then after that makes sense to say, hey, in my kind of concept that I have here, I need these 3 aspects to buy, and let's search the market, find the startup, and see how we can actually slot in startup into it. But in startup will actually work nicely if your organization is prepared to receive that startup. At the moment, what you have is actually big companies are just finding interesting startup, they swallow this up, and they kill it.
All the time.
I haven't seen successful integration of startup in Australian corporate world.
Ever?
If you have seen them, tell me which one is that. And even worse, neobanking, and government is saying we will establish neobanking because we want to strengthen competition in banking sector. As soon as you have a startup started creating interesting ideas and creating new things, the big banks just follow that, and the government approved it. And what kind of competition we are talking here? And then immediately they swallow the startup. We know a few of the banking startups are swallowed by big banks. And because government allowed it. Instead of actually strengthening regional banks or allowing them, or leave these neobanks to build and create among themselves or something like that, we just follow them. And then what happened? You integrate. If you look at UBank, NAB, what is there is UBank brand. Everything else is NAB. And then NAB's culture there prevailed, and that's it. You can't do much about it.
Can't do much about that. There's a ferocious commercial engine, obviously, that's driving a lot of decisions. And I'm wondering if that's the driver, to what extent we feel like we can control it or take a sidestep here or there to bring things into a new perspective. I feel like sometimes that's the status quo is immovable, and you're often trying to step either around it, but you're still having to deliver against the target that you've been set because that's the broader commercial goal. So yeah, it feels like as an entrepreneur within a company of 10,000 people, what is your remit in terms of influence, and how can you do that in a way that feels fulfilling to you, in a way that you feel you're contributing? Have you got any perspectives on that?
Yeah. So when we worked with one of the companies, we had a great concept, and everybody agreed that's fantastic concept. And then because the tradition, because of the legacy in that company, it was really hard, almost impossible to break through to actually implement this innovation. And at one point, we have a team, internal team, very enthusiastic doing stuff, and people are really into it completely. And I had a meeting with leadership, and I said, look, why don't we actually create startup from this company, from this project, and then offer people redundancy who are working there, and ask them to put this redundancy as a kind of in capital in the new company, and we invest into this as well. And then people will be employed by the startup, and they will own partially that startup together with that organization. And I thought that's potentially a good model to test and see. And then in the end, when it's actually successful, if it's proven in the market, then you bring them back to the company, and then all people who are there, they will be really familiar with the environment, with people, how they work, and things like that. It would be much easier to integrate that into existing business. And to my surprise was actually when I asked why not, the answer was we want actually our company brand to be seen as innovative brand rather than actually have a lot of startup. But then in the end, we didn't implement that. We didn't actually put it in the market because of the constraints of the complexity of the organization, things like that, and didn't end up seeing as innovative company as well. So it's hard, and we need probably more leaders who are keen to take this risk and saying, I'm going to do this, and then we'll see how it happens.
Yeah, leadership was a point I was going to raise, probably because the leaders that are making the decisions at C-level now were not always at that level, obviously. And so what conditions do you think we're setting up in terms of those that are rising up and emerging leaders? Do you feel like the conditions for intrapreneurship are right for the next wave of leaders to emerge and to be able to make those decisions that you were describing with a bit more conviction, a bit more courage?
I think there are multiple factors here. And then I look at that from several perspectives. And first, in my view, and the biggest challenge we have is that we are so focused on digging the dirt and shipping that overseas. And the mining sector, which is fantastic. Well, put it this way, we are fortunate that we have this such a rich in mineral resources that we can live on that. But they will not be here forever. That's number one. And number two, these resources should be boost for our thinking and the way where we go. But we actually have opposite situation. A lot of people are happy where they are now, and we are probably victims of our own growth because we had like 27 or 30 years unprecedented growth, but never had a recession. And then the leaders are saying, "What are you asking me to change something? Why would I change? It's working. I'm fine. I'm happy." But if you look at just one sector, like manufacturing sector, I'm helping these guys from AU Manufacturing Media. We helped them to establish this campaign to select the most innovative manufacturers in Australia 3 years ago. And then it's really going well. We did pro bono work helping them to actually, because I'm really passionate about manufacturing, because I believe that manufacturing in Australia, it could be very advanced. And because we have expertise and we have universities very good reputation globally. And we can actually create a manufacturing environment where we're just doing some highly and smart manufacturing outcomes. And if you look at that, for example, I'm not sure if it's back in the 90s that manufacturing contributed 12% to Australian GDP. Today, it contributes only 6%. And I'm really glad that government is actually having this, what they call this National Reconstruction Fund, which is really boosting this innovation and manufacturing in Australia. And then Future of Australia Made, which is another very good. And if you look at that between these two big initiatives, we are talking about $25 or $30 billion government money. But if you put actually then private money and other companies, that should create massive environment. But the problem with these initiatives, big initiatives, it takes time. Because after many, many years thinking, well, we are happy with the resources, and we never leveraged a mining boom back in 2000, early 2000, and then build this environment where we have a fantastic creative environment where people start moving on it. And that's the number one problem in culture. And then government started now to boosting that thinking. But, the state environment in Australian corporate world is that boards, in many cases, are very conservative. And if you look at that, when I finished my PhD, I was thinking I will do Australian Institute of Company Directors course, and I would like to be a non-executive director and a board member. And then I completed this course, and I realized I was thinking I would push innovation, I would creative thinking and things like that. But I realized that it's nothing to do with innovation. It's all about compliance and make sure that everything is in order from compliance perspective. Otherwise, you are at risk, and your assets are at risk and things like that. And I was thinking, no, I'm too loose to be a board member. And that's the problem with our board culture. If you compare board culture in America and here, you can see the difference. Entire board culture is built on entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, while in Australia is more looking for compliance, follow up what law is saying, and if it's that, move on, tick a box, and we move on. So that's the second impediment slowing us down. And the third one is very much leadership. And then when you look at there are a lot of surveys, as you can imagine. And so one of them was saying, I think BCG did it a while ago, interviewing 3,000 CEOs globally, and they asked them, what are the three biggest priorities on your agenda? And then 75% of leaders, innovation was top three priorities on their agenda. But when they ask how committed are they to innovation, only half of them committed. And committed to innovation means I do have a framework and strategy how to do that. I have a very clear roadmap to implement it. I have a processes, methods, tools, people, governance, funding, KPIs. I have that in place. And if I have that in place, I'm committed leader. And as I said, half of those leaders, and I believe in Australia is less than half, are committed to innovation. They talk about innovation, but there is no commitment. You need to demonstrate that. It's one thing you are going out in your town hall discussion and say, we have to be innovative company, blah, blah. But then when people are asking how much money you dedicate to innovation, and say, we will find out, which means I'm not committed. And that's the serious problem. But for that requires leadership mindset shift. And what we found, it's very interesting actually, when we have discussions internally, my team, and we often talk about who is our competitor. And then some of my team members will say, this company, that company, and things like that. And I was telling them, you know what, guys, none of those companies are our competitors. In my view, leadership mindset is our key competitor. Because the question here is how we convince leader that it is important to think some things in different way and take your business in different way. And then not many leaders will do it. But when we find that leader, and then when we start working with them, it's kind of heaven. Like, you just enjoy doing that. And currently we are working few clients. The leaders are absolutely dedicated for it.
Yeah.
And you will see, I can't tell the names of the companies, but you will see the impact. And I don't want to say, yes, we are helping them, but it's not about us. It's about leaders. And if you have a leader who is keen, and then they will exhaust everything from us and saying, give me this, give me that. What about this? What about that? Move this, move that. And you will see the impact. We already have seen few companies that we work with very ambitious and open-minded leaders, and we can see the impact.
Yeah, so I think it's around, obviously, we started the interview with really an interesting perspective on who you surround yourself with. And you as an entrepreneur have decisions to make in terms of your career. Who do you align to? Who do you avoid? And it's the same with social circles, but it feels like there's a real importance around where to place your effort and almost hooking your carriage to the right train. Because if you don't, then you're down a path of either staying the same or into a leadership situation which probably tips either towards more conservatism. So for the entrepreneurs out there, I'm thinking that as a tangible piece of advice, it's really around assessing the conditions around you and the environment around you and understanding whether the leadership is there to make you feel comfortable, to push you, to inspire you, to question what you're doing, or is it there to keep you down and in one place? And I feel like that is a good starting point. But a lot of people out there will feel quite powerless in this situation.
Yeah, so. But I can tell you, Chris, for your audience, tricks that I use, it's not just accidental kind of thing. So there are well-defined approaches how you do that. So one of them is prioritizing stakeholders and then or influencers, whichever way you want to put it. But when you prioritize them and you have some certain methods how you do that, and once you have a clear picture who are your essential influencers or essential stakeholders, then you actually create some communication and interact with them. And they don't need to be told they are essential influencers or stakeholders, but you have a clever strategy and you communicate some things to them on a regular basis. So, for example, you might say, Chris is kind of driving this business and he is key influencers for potential innovation. But he doesn't know that he has that potential or he can drive business in that direction. And then one simple trick could be, I will just send Chris one article which is talking about innovation from prestige journal or whatever, written in simple language, and then say, hey, Chris, well, look at this. If you want to have a chat over coffee and see how do you feel about it. And suddenly you start it. And some people will say, we'll just delete. But, but true people, true leaders will start actually thinking, you spark them with something.
Yeah.
And they will jump on it. Some of them, probably 80% of them will jump if you just go dedicate. But it's not just, here is the article, read it. If you actually put a little bit more effort and explain why is that important for him, for Chris. If I put it and say, hey, I would say, Chris, look at this. And I think from your perspective, it will be for this and this and that. And then you can't actually get an email and just say, well, I will delete this. You will go and say, hey, I'm just curious, because he was actually thinking about my business and connection to this article. That's one small thing. But let alone bringing friend and say, hey, I'm bringing in person who is really expert in innovation, who wants to come, a brown bag lunch, come to see what people are talking.
Yeah.
And then you start actually sparking slowly and creating. And then I bet after that session, you will have 3 or 4 champions coming to you and say, hey, do you need help? And this is kind of you creating movement. Sounds like voluntary movement, but yet if you don't have a leader who is strong, you can go bottom up. And then ideally you would have a leader who would say, hey, here is my strategy, my view, how I do that roadmap. Here's the money, here's the people, do it. But if you don't, and if you still burst on creativity and keen on creativity, there are ways to do that.
Yeah. No, I like that. It's also like running a lot of experiments and almost prototyping what you think the response is going to be. The situation that you described, I had it in a previous company. I tried to I invited one leader to an event that I thought would be really exciting for them. They were not interested in that. I tried another one where I was sending stuff to the CEO, and you can almost get an immediate read. And I think it's almost like a bit of a research technique for an entrepreneur, because you can really sound out based on that response. Like you say, the 3 people that turn up with their lunch and listen to you or your friend talk for an hour, that's going to give you a sense as to how much engagement or interest there is really quickly. So I think that's very practical. Thank you.
That's right. But look, there is no written rules. There are some techniques how to do that, and then you try to navigate that and influence other people. But very often it's really dependent on enthusiasm. As I said, if you don't have a leader and you don't want to give up on the organization. And I told you, I decided to push boundaries to the point that they fired me, and they didn't fire me. And they like actually quite opposite. They like it, and although it was annoying for them at the beginning and thinking like, what this guy wants to do, clear. And then suddenly, when things started getting clearer, when we announced that we have a couple of $1 million contribution to bottom line from these programs, and they all started getting very serious about it.
That's a good point as well. How comfortable do you think intrapreneurs should be with pushing things so far that they would get fired? Do you think that would be an expectation, or do you think that doesn't?
No. I had a strong push when I was talking to my MBA students and said, well, you must be paying your mortgage. You paid more your mortgage, your family, probably kids went out or things like that, and that's how you're thinking. But it is not. It's more about my confidence that I believe in that it will work. But even if I lose job here, I will find a job somewhere else. That's more about me. Like, you have an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is very confident saying, I'm going to actually bring this idea and I'm pushing that. Even if it's not working, people are pushing hard. And we know that the biggest problem with entrepreneur is that people fell in love with their ideas. And then they can't actually see it if it's not working, if it's not actually solving problem that people are looking for. Similar here in entrepreneurship is actually you need to love it, and you need to actually be enthusiastic about that to the point that, so what? If you know all of these techniques, how it works, how you engage people, how you engage followers or influencers or stakeholders, how you navigate your colleagues around this, looking for funding and things like that, well, that's the kind of way that will give you comfort that wherever you go, you will succeed. And then you just need to find leaders who will actually support you. Simple as that. And that was my belief. And probably overconfident potentially, I don't know. I didn't test it. I would tell you a different story if I tested, if they fired me and I couldn't find a job. So who knows?
And you can test that as early as an interview. You can put yourself forward to that extent to really see what response you get even at that stage. You know whether the organizational fit will be there or not, don't you think?
Yeah, that's right. Well, to be honest, when I was at AMP, when we started actually getting a lot of big guns in the town coming to see that. And then, so all senior executives, and they would say, oh, wow, this is really fantastic. I got a call from headhunters saying, well, these guys want to talk to you, but I didn't want to go because I found these leaders buying in, and I was thinking, well, I don't want to go until I exhaust my all options. And I did.
Sounds like the right decision. And then you were able to obviously move on and up and set up
Exactly
for that. So fantastic. Hey, maybe we finish on one question, which is probably still around entrepreneurship, but it's also maybe pointing to the future and where you see things going. Is there anything in that area that you want to just share with the audience before we close?
I think the technology, it's always double-edged sword. Sometimes it's playing good kind of role, sometimes it's playing very annoying role. But I think in this particular situation is that technology will finally, I wouldn't like to say force us, but actually will push us into territory that we need to think more creatively in the large organizations. And because we're getting to the point that wasting a lot of time investing in technology that are not actually serving purpose or don't have a end user experience, which is quite annoying. And you have a lot of news in the papers these days. People aren't happy. If you look at the superannuation companies, that you have ASIC is forcing superannuation companies, CBAS, to actually get serious about customer experience. So, and how you get there is if you have a creative people actually thinking about customer experience. So, and more those things, and then these renewable energies and things like that, it's actually pushing us more and more that those big companies need to get serious. They can't rely on small startups anymore. They need to actually transform themselves and get serious about this innovation and the program that they are working. The situation that people are just calling innovation for innovation's sake, but more and more companies and leaders, I can see they are getting behind that, and they really would like to. And then in today's social media, like the leaders are exposed. You can't pretend anymore that you are an innovative guy, but if you don't see in the companies, people will call this out, and customers will call this out. And there are a lot of things, in my view, and as I'm linking up with the smart manufacturing, it will be inevitable. If we want to have a smart manufacturing in Australia, you need to build the kind of profile and capabilities of intrapreneurs, not entrepreneurs. Well, you can have entrepreneurs in, absolutely, but usually, Steve Jobs was saying the reason why he was fired from Apple in the first place was because he didn't recognize that he is not actually leading startup. He didn't recognize that he's leading very serious corporation, big corporation. He was in mindset that he's still running startup, and he was making a decision on his own. He's doing some stuff, go this way and things like that. And then when he pushed out from Apple, then he realized he is one of the key kind of advocates of intrapreneurship, because he said every entrepreneur, when they reach some certain scale, they need to shift into intrapreneur, which is much more complex job that you need to navigate through this process. So the more people we have, and I can see there are courses in Australia, in intrapreneurship courses people are running. And then I think the term intrapreneurship might be quite clumsy, because it's very often people mix up with entrepreneurship. When I say I'm an entrepreneur, I say, oh yeah, you have a startup. I say, no, intrapreneur. And they say, oh, okay, yeah, I got it. So it's confusing. That's now, a lot of people call that corporate innovation or something like that. So it might be better distinction between entrepreneurship and corporate innovation. But I think you can't, you might say I'm a corporate entrepreneur. So anyway, so quite confusing, but I think the future here is we will need more of those people in corporate world, which will create strong link between business and technology, and then which will work together in the function of end user. And I really like to finish this on a very interesting quote from one American football coach, when he was actually talking to his team, and he was saying the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is in that little extra. And that's what actually innovation and entrepreneurs will create ordinary companies into extraordinary.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Munib. And you brought a whole wealth of stories and perspectives into the podcast episode today. And I just can't thank you enough for coming onto the show and for sharing those with us and the audience, obviously. So thank you so much. We'll leave it there. If people want to get in touch with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn or email me at munib@wave.design and anytime. And but probably LinkedIn might be the best channel to do that. And Chris, thank you very much for inviting me. And I can see you are experiencing similar things, what we have been experiencing, which is very interesting. And I hope at some point we will start cooperating or collaborating and things like that. But I really hope that this story to your audience will resonate with your audience. And I hope we will have more entrepreneurs in the corporate world.
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you on that. Thanks so much, Dr. Munib.
Thank you.
We'll leave it there.
Thank you. All the best.